All right, I'd like to start today by talking about how you would create a website that actually lived on the web. I mean, right now, you guys are creating web pages and you can run them on your own machine and see how they look. And that's great. But really, the idea of the web is that it can be shared worldwide with anyone. So how could you create, how could you take a portfolio, for example, or a personal website, or a fan site for some topic that you enjoy, or a blog, or whatever, how you could go and take and create that actually online. And there's a series of steps here that are in this document that I have up on the screen. And I want to run through it, hit some of the highlights, maybe hit some of the things that they skip, and then go from there. First of all, first thing to do is select your publishing option. We've learned about coding in this class. We've learned on a nuts and bolts level how to create web pages in CSS. And later today, we're going to start talking about JavaScript. That is sort of the custom way of creating a website. That would be like, for example, if you went to a tailor and had a suit made exactly to your wishes, exactly for you. You can theoretically create your own website to do anything that you want it to do and have it displayed the way that you want it to and have it behave. It mentions here this is the most difficult and time-consuming option, but you've taken this class, so that puts you a leg up on a lot of people. On the plus side, you have total flexibility to create anything you want. Second thing is a website builder. And they list some of the website builders here. That would be a page, a site where you go and you essentially lay out your page without having to write the code. All right. You can do this very quickly, but you don't always have the control that you might want. I've worked on sites like this. In a way, Canvas is like that. I don't write the HTML code for my Canvas pages. I go in and I put content in there. Actually, that's more of a content management system, which we'll get to next. But there's a site I work on for an organization I belong to. And again, it's drag and drop. You can drag, I want an image here, you can click the image icon and drag it to where you want to be and say what image you want in it and so on. That would be an option. But again, there are limitations to that. Third option is a content management system, and that's probably more of what Canvas really is, because it's a way for people to enter content to a website without having to write code. And some of the popular ones include WordPress. It's probably the most popular one, and there's some other ones as well that they have listed here. If you notice that WordPress is by and large the most used content management system, using 42% of websites that use it, at least at the time that this was made. And I would imagine it's still today. Or you can go and create a combination of that. You can, on many systems, maybe hand code a page that you add to your WordPress site, or hand code a page that you add to your website builder. I use the one from GoDaddy, for example. So you can custom code stuff in there as well. The next thing you want to do is prepare your web content. This would be where you would go through the steps sort of like I had you go through for the design process. You figure out what you want to discuss on the site, what you want to cover, what your content is going to pertain to on this site. And again, a key to deciding that is, first of all, deciding goals. You have goals of what you want to get out. Maybe for a portfolio, your goal is to be able to showcase your HTML skills to a prospective employer. that would be one example of that. So you have a goal, and then you have goals of the people visiting your site. You know, maybe a person visiting your site wants to find a HTML developer, and they want to see if you qualify for that role. But anyhow, you come up with those goals, you come up then with the requirements of what you're going to put on the site specifically, and then you start worrying about the layout of the site and the layout of the individual pages. And they talk about doing some things here. I wouldn't say do these things instead of the things I described, but do them in addition to what I have described. Choose a name. You get to define the name of your site, all right, provided that it's available. You can't, for example, call your website google.com, right? Because there's already a google.com. What you have to do is you have to register your domain. And there's a number of organizations that, allow you to register a domain. All right. Generally speaking, you want it simple. You want it to be short. You want it to be able to be remembered without having to write it down. So for example, if I was going to do a photography site, I would not say Michael L. Zeller's photography company. That's just too long to remember. People are liable to forget the middle initial or forget that I added company on the end, or did I write out company completely, or did I abbreviate it? Just would be hard to assess that. And by registering that URL, you guarantee that no one else can use that URL, provided you don't let it expire. Now, that's something that can happen. You typically register the URL for a certain amount of time, for like a year, for example. You have to be very careful not to let it expire, because if it expires, someone else can register a website with that URL. And oftentimes they'll sort of, you know, to capitalize on your mistake, they'll charge you to get use of the URL again, the person that registered that domain. And you don't want anything like that happening. So be aware of renewing your URL. Otherwise, you're liable to find different content on your website. That actually happened to a site that I had some dealings with, not as a webmaster, but as a user. And I went to the URL that I thought the site was, and I get some other content. And it was like surprise. Then I talked to someone that has that's more inside the organization, and they explained to me what happened. And it really, really is a bad thing. Not to mention, you might have to change emails, because you can have emails go to your domain. Like instead of mikezellers@gmail.com, I could have mz@mikezellers.com, for example. When you register that URL, that says that your website name belongs to you, and it makes sure that it's unique. It will then go out and populate what are called domain name servers. And these are ways of tying the domain name that you've registered to a particular web server. And that's one of your next steps. Use images and video content. Okay, Matt, we're still covering that stuff. Okay, design and build. We'll get to web servers in a minute here. Design and build the site. Either use WordPress or a website builder or custom code it. Wireframes, we talked about those in this class. Design your look and feel. We talked about that in the class. Make sure your presentation matches your content. If your site is meant to be serious, you know, have a serious looking color scheme. Don't have a color scheme that looks frivolous or looks silly. Have a very serious looking color scheme. Easy to navigate, that goes without saying. That's one of the key things of a website success is that once people have found your site, can they find what they wanted to? earlier on, they talked a little bit about what's called search engine optimization. Talked about here. But once people have found your site, you have to make sure that they can find what particular content you're looking into. And we talked about this, a structure chart, which defines how the website is going to be laid out, and that it'll be laid out in a very understandable manner. Now we get into web hosting. All right. Sometimes web hosting goes along with the website builder. For example, the one site that I manage is hosted on GoDaddy servers, and it is I use the web builder for it, so I don't have to find a separate hosting for it. But there's any number of places that you can host your website. All right. You could theoretically, if you're doing this for an organization, let's say, have one of your computers host the website. And what do I mean by hosting a website? How's that different than what you do now in class? Well, you would have a particular set of software called a web server that would be on the internet. Instead of making requests, it would be listening for requests from the user and then responding to those requests. All right. And you can find there's any number of them. GoDaddy's a popular one. There's a lot of other ones, and you can look and see what's available. Make sure that the web server has what particular technology tools you want to use available. Like, we haven't talked about it in this class, but if you plan on using your website in PHP, make sure you're able to run PHP on that web server. Now, there's two kinds of hosting that you can get. Shared hosting, where your website's on a machine with several other websites. It's usually less expensive. Or managed hosting, where the hosting company does that. DIY, again, that's not recommended. There's also dedicated servers, which I don't see them mentioning here, which is where the web server computer only hosts your website and doesn't host any other websites. All right, then you upload the files. That's similar to, but not exactly the same as uploading files to Canvas. Right? You select you can create folders on your web server. You can upload content to particular folders. Before you launch, make sure you test your site for any bugs. If you create a website and the links don't work, well, you know, you're going to lose users, because if they click on something and you get an error, chances are the user is going to abandon the website. They're not going to try to debug it or figure out exactly what's wrong. We've talked about in this class using relative addresses. So, for example, if it's in if an image is in a folder underneath the web page called images, you would say images / and not use the complete file name, which would be something like http://mikezellers.com/images/ whatever. You could do you would test that on your own machine first of all, and then you would upload it and publish the site. That means actually putting it on the web. Now, sometimes people do what's called a soft launch, which means that they will put it on the web, but they won't really promote it or advertise it until they have a chance to do some final testing on it. So it's there, people can find it, but you're not really promoting it. So you'll be limited on who's going to access it. Then you can test it actually on the web server, on the production web server, and make sure everything works. Finally, submitting to search engines. Then plan for the future. I like this phrase, a website isn't a set it and forget it project. You should have a plan for maintenance and improvements. All right. Nothing is discouraging like seeing a website and it might say last updated, January 2015. You're liable to think, gee, is the information even relevant anymore? Is it valid? So keep it updated. Notice this argument, they practice what they preach. This argument was initially created some time ago in 2022, but then it was updated on 2024. All right, so you know that the information is fairly current on this website. But enhance it, add more capabilities, use feedback from the users if you get any about what to change from your site. Keep in mind, again, your needs and the user needs. If a band has a website that they put up, maybe the next step would be to create a online store and to sell merch at, or to add the ability to download the music from the band or whatever. But think about how you're going to change it. That is one of the reasons we talk a lot about making your programs and making your web pages easy to change, because you're going to have to change it. All right. To have a good site, you need to be able to update it and change it. So that's critical. Increasing revenue through monetization. There's things that you can do. You can put ads on the site. Affiliate marketing, that would be, let's say if you ran a cooking website, you might have a link to Amazon for the cookware that you use. If you had a video of you making an omelet, for example, you might have a link on the side that says, an affiliate link for Amazon that says, click this link and you can purchase the pan that I use in that video. And you get then a small cut from Amazon. Social media strategy. Some people talk about, social media as it makes unnecessary having public websites. And I don't agree with that. I mean, I think you need more than just a Facebook page if you're going to have an organization. Facebook pages and other social media are good for promoting events that happen, but like to go back and get a comprehensive look at the organization. You're not going to get that just by scanning the Facebook. It's not organized that way. It's organized chronologically, and it just has the most recent updates and things like that. But if you go in and create a website, you can gather all that information. All right. I encourage you to try it. Put up a portfolio site, create a fan site. And I say this for a couple reasons. First of all, employers have indicated to me when we have our advisory committee that the one thing that they value a lot is when students go beyond just doing the coursework in a class. If you complete your courses and you get A's in your class, that's great. All right. But there's a lot of students that do well in their classes. You need something to really differentiate yourself from the other students. And one way that you can do that is working on projects that you create, working on projects that are outside of the curriculum. So if you know a restaurant and they don't have a web page, or they don't have a particularly good web page, if you know the owner or whatever, talk to them about doing that. It's an item you can put on your resume, and it will allow you to showcase your skills, and you can use that to point employers to say, look, I can create web pages because look, I already have. All right. And that really can differentiate you. And if you're not, if you're into other aspects of programming, like, mobile development or software, you can create apps or whatever to do a similar thing. But since this is a web development class, I'm focusing on web pages. All right. Let's get on to JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is the third language that we are going to use, and they sort of form like a triangle with the other languages that we've learned. We've learned HTML, and that contains the page's content and also defines the structure. By structure, I mean it separates the page into sections. What is the header? What is the footer? What is the nav section? And so on. And then content. What are the links? What are the articles? What images are you using? What videos are you using? What links do you have? And so on. CSS deals with the appearance physical layout. And let me explain to you what I mean by appearance and physical layout. Well, appearance, we know, deal with things like fonts, colors, size of fonts, font faces that we're using, and so on. What do I mean by physical layout, and how is that different than structure? Well, structure, which is defined in HTML, would be something like, I have these 5 links that are my navigation on the page. And I set them apart and define that in a nav section within the HTML. The physical layout would be that I want to put that physical, that item along the left side of the page. So I could have the same HTML that has a nav section, and maybe I put the nav this way, maybe I put it this way. That is controlled by CSS. The physical way that it looks, the physical layout of the page is defined in CSS. The structure, that is that you have a nav section and it contains these 5 links, is defined in HTML. Now, what do we do with JavaScript? JavaScript handles behavior on the page. Another way to describe behavior is interactivity. To a large degree, that's what JavaScript does. And what do I mean by interactivity? I mean that you, the user, does something and the page responds a certain way. You do something, the page responds. And it does respond without going back to the web server. All right, because you could say that links are interactive. They are. If you click on a link, the site does something, it brings up a new page. But that's not the kind of interactivity I'm talking about when I talk about JavaScript. I mean something like this. Let's go to our website here. So I go to it. That page loads. All right. There's any number of things I can do. First of all, it isn't really interactivity, but the fact that the slideshow is running is done via JavaScript. Because what JavaScript does is it changes the HTML and CSS of a page. Another example of interactivity is this, when I do the mouse hover. That happens without reloading the page. In other words, it happens instantaneously. When I reload the page, I see a little flicker in the page like this. Notice how the page kind of flickered. And depending on your internet connection, it might take longer or shorter to flicker, but it still does a little flicker. Here, as soon as I put my mouse on it, it changes and there's no flicker whatsoever. That is done via JavaScript. All right. Now let me explain, give an overview about how this kind of functionality works. All right. We can put in the HTML code to listen for or to wait for user events. Now, what do I mean by user events? I mean things like the user types a character on the page. The user clicks on something. The user puts their mouse over something. All that are examples of user events that can occur. What JavaScript then does is it goes and it changes the HTML and or CSS. In this case, more than likely what happens, I haven't analyzed the code, but when we put our mouse over this, the CSS for this menu is changed from invisible to visible. The visibility or whether a section of HTML displays or not is an aspect of CSS. And you can change that dynamically via JavaScript by changing the CSS to say, okay, this is no longer not visible, this is visible. And when you take your mouse out, that's another event, and you can then cause it to disappear again. All right, let's look at a very simple example that does something like this. Something much simpler, but something basically like this. And we can go from there. All right, let's say we have a download the right file. Yes, I did. Let's look at this one. Let's start backwards. Let's look at spoiler 2 first. Let's say I had a page of Star Wars spoilers. I'm going to make the font bigger just by using the feature of the browser. So this is very bare bones. There's no CSS. Remember, I get to do examples like this because I'm not submitting my work to myself to be graded. If I submitted this as for an assignment in this class, I deduct some points because I did really very minimal stuff with CSS in it. All right, therefore I would deduct points. So what's the event? The event is the user puts their mouse over this. So who is Luke Skywalker's father? Of course, we all know that was Yoda. Secondly, who shot first? Han shot first. All right. Let's see how we do this in actual code, and then we can make some general statements about how this JavaScript works. Now, for simplicity, I put everything in the HTML file. I put the CSS and I put the HTML, and I even put the JavaScript. You can actually separate things and put the JavaScript in its own file, and in that way you can reuse it from page to page. Again, the whole idea of maintainability so that when you do come back and change it, it's easy to change. All right, let's look at spoiler 2. All right, first of all, notice what we have. In style, I have p.spoiler display none. What does that mean? That means any paragraph, that's what the P stands for. Remember, if you don't have anything before it, it's the HTML tag. If you have a dot before it, it's the class. If you have a pound sign before it, it's the ID. But this is saying any paragraph with a class of spoiler will get this style. And the style is display none. So what are the two paragraphs like that? The two spoilers, Yoda and Han. All right. Notice what we have on these paragraphs. The paragraph that asks the question, who is Luke Skywalker's father? We have some additional attributes on the paragraph. Make this bigger, hopefully we can see it. This whole thing is the paragraph tag. Here we have the less than sign that starts the paragraph tag. We have the greater than sign that ends the paragraph tag. We have two what are called user events. That's something that the user does on the page, that they interact with the page. And in this case, it's when the user puts their mouse on this paragraph, this occurs. And this is a little snippet of JavaScript. And what does that JavaScript do? It does this instruction. And I'll explain this instruction step by step. In general, what's being done is this. We write code to find the thing on the page that we want to change, and then we change it. So in this case, notice this is enclosed within quotes. We have quotes that go around the whole JavaScript expression. Document means the thing I want to do something with is somewhere on this page. Get element by ID is going to find on the page anything that has an ID of spoiler 1. What has an ID of spoiler 1? This paragraph does. What do we want to do with the thing on this page that has an ID of spoiler 1? We want to change its style. All right. What do we want to change its style? What about the style do we want to change? We want to change this display property. Display none means it's not displayed at all. We want to change it to block. And block means it gets displayed as a block tag. Block tag, again, has a new line before and after it. So, look at the web page. I'll try to put these so I can see both of these at the same time. There we go. Kind of. I put my mouse over who is Luke's father. The on mouse over event occurs, which says, give me the thing on the page that has an ID of spoiler 1, change its style, specifically the display property of the style, change it to black. So I put my mouse over it and boom, it appears. When I take my mouse off of it, the opposite occurs. Get element by ID, spoiler 1, change the style, change the display property to none again. So I take it off, none. Now we talked before about the difference between an ID and a class. A class can define many different things. Notice we have 2 paragraphs, both with the same class. An ID has to be unique. So let's generalize how much of our JavaScript is going to work. Number 1, something happens. Usually the user does something with the page, moves the mouse around, clicks a key, something like that. The page finishes loading, some event occurs. We use this kind of coding, and this is called the document object model. The document object model is a way to find different things on the page in our code. And what we'll be using a lot of is this get element by ID, because that finds that specific item on the page. What do we want to change about it? We want to change its style to display equals that. So, user event happens. We use the document object model to find the things on the page we want to do something with. Then we use JavaScript statements to change either the HTML or the CSS. In this case, we're changing the CSS. Now notice that I use double quotes around the entire JavaScript statement. I use single quotes within. Because if it saw a double quote here, browser would think that's the end of the statement. And notice that Visual Studio Code actually gives us that reminder. What happens if I didn't notice that, or if I use another text editor that doesn't give me that warning? Well, my code wouldn't work in it anymore. How do you debug it if your code doesn't work? The first thing you do is, if you're using Google Chrome, and there's similar things in other browsers as well, you click that 3 dots, go to More Tools, Developer Tools, look at the console, and it says, well, gives you a very non-descriptive error. It says unexpected end of input. At the very least, it tells us what line is wrong. And in this case, it's line 17. So instead of having to look at the entire thing, we look around line 17. Won't always be exactly on line 17, but we look around it. In this case, the problem is actually on line 16 that I have these quotes. So you would use the single quotes inside of the double quotes. This is identical, except instead of doing spoiler 1, we do it to spoiler 2. So we're going to follow that recipe. User action occurs. Use the DOM to find the things that we want to do something with. And then finally use the JavaScript language to change the specific things. Let me look at an overview of the next example that we'll go over. a couple other examples, and you can study these, and we'll talk more about them next time. This is a sampling of the things that we can do. You can change the color of something. Show spoiler with a button instead of a mouse over. Show spoiler with a button. Take a look at this code and see if you can decipher what's going on in it. I then have this. It shows you sort of how Loring Community College does their pull down or pop-up menus. I only do it with the first menu item. This uses a click. This we can make the text big or make it normal size. Finally, we have these examples of we put the mouse over, or actually put our mouse over the image and we get larger versions of that. You've probably seen this on many sites where there's little thumbnail images, and when you either mouse over or click on one of the thumbnails, you get to see the whole image. We will cover those in class next week. Here is my plan. My plan is next week will be more JavaScript. Again, the purpose of this class is not to make you a JavaScript expert. That takes a while. But we will have more JavaScript stuff next week. That will be week 14. Week 15 is a work day where there will be no lecture, but I will be available for you to talk to me about your project. You can do it in person or you can do it online. And in that way, you can show me what you're planning to do with your project. I hope you've started it by then. And I can give you feedback about what you would need to change to get a good grade. Folks in this class have done great work. I really hope that you can really take the advantage of that little extra week that you have and put forth a really good effort to do a great job. This class is one of the funnest classes for me to grade, to see everything that people have come up with. And so I hope you really take advantage of it and come up with great websites. So that's week 15, will be a work date on the project. Finally, finals week is when the project and all other assignments is due. So I will post this to Canvas at some point, but just to give you a preview of that. Okay, there are no other questions. We will see you next week or in lab.